Hello and welcome once again to the Powerhouse Woman Show, where we gather powerhouse women to speak directly to you, oh powerhouse woman, giving advice and also lessons learned. And this is a show where we are gathered together in support of each other. Have you ever been told by someone, you should write a book? Your life is fascinating. Or have you ever thought, I should write a book? There are so many things I want to share, things that I've been through, lessons learned, but I don't know the first thing about it or how to proceed or even what parts of my life story should I share. And we are delighted. We're joined by Lisa Frazier Page, and Lisa Frazier Page has so many accolades. She is a award-winning reporter, nationally acclaimed author, a professional in residence at LSU, Louisiana State University Manship School of Communication. She's co-authored New York Times bestselling book, a Los Angeles Times bestselling book, and she is just amazing. A 35-year career that continues to go on and on. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us on the Powerhouse Woman Show.
Thank you, Monica, for inviting me, and thank you for those kind words.
Oh, all true. I've double checked the facts, so they're all true. Well, let's begin. We're going to get some advice and what you've experienced and what do you see as a way for those who are really serious in 2022 to begin the process or even finish that book they've been working on for 20 years or so. What is your earliest memory of being drawn to writing? You're this little person living in Bogalusa, Louisiana. And did you always know that this would be your path?
I've always written, Monica. I didn't know what I would do with it, but it was my thing. From almost as early as I can remember, I've always been a writer. I used to write in a diary. I had a daily diary. And I would spend hours just sort of writing about my day, writing about the things that happened. When I was happy, I wrote about it. When I was sad, I wrote about it. So I was writing all the time. I didn't know, as I said, what I would do with it down the road. But when I think back to where it started with that little diary.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. And what was it about writing? Was it, you had all these ideas in your head? Was it a way to escape? What connected you to it, particularly when you were writing in that journal, that diary as a young person?
It's hard even to explain. It was just my friend. It was a way to express myself. I wasn't always comfortable talking about it. So it was always easier for me to write what I felt as opposed to expressing it verbally. So oftentimes I was just getting my thoughts out, getting my feelings out. So writing for me was just a way to communicate, not necessarily with another person, because of course your diary is just for you, but it was a way for me to express how I was feeling. And then, later on, when I started to think about careers, it became something more. But early on, it was just a way for me to communicate my feelings.
That is powerful. And you talked about when it's you in the diary, that's one thing. There's no criticism. There's no like, what do you mean by that? As you
Exactly.
begin to go into the area of making this a profession, how did your mindset shift? Because again, a lot of people don't realize that when we put our work out there, whether it's a book, whether it's an autobiography or a memoir or a blog or a post or whatever, that people are watching it and you would love for it to always be really accepted. So how did you begin to say, this is what I know to write, and I've checked my facts and I'm putting it out there?
Well, first of all, when I went to college, I wanted to be an English teacher because I loved writing and I loved the written word so much. I wanted to teach others to write and to love it as much as I did. But when I got to Dillard University, I had some professors who were professionals who influenced me heavily, and they saw something in me that I didn't even see at the time, and they influenced me to write. And so, of course, when you start to write professionally, it's a whole different ball game because you open yourself up to criticism, especially when I became a columnist, because now you're not just writing about the facts, but you're writing your opinion. You're expressing your opinion. And I think that was the hardest thing for me as a young person, to just understand that, there are some really mean people out there. Of course, you know that everybody's not going to agree with your opinion, whatever it is. But that was the hardest part for me when I became a columnist. I wrote about race quite a bit. And of course, we know that's a very contentious subject. And I wrote provocatively about race because I was feeling a lot of these issues. I was feeling a lot of anger. I was feeling a lot of frustration. I was feeling a lot of what we feel even now. And so a lot of that came out in my work. And there were some very uncomfortable days when I was writing as a columnist.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. And I bring it up, audience, because again, those of you who are at this place and space where you want to write your story, I always tell people, especially if it's an autobiography, you're not just telling your story, you're telling everybody in the family story. It's not
Right.
just you. But we're going to get into that in just a moment. I'd love for you to tell us how you were able, or how it came about that you are a co-author of the story of three young friends. They grew up in Newark, but they made a vow, a promise, a pact with each other that all three of them, no matter what came their way, would become doctors. What was that experience like for you, Lisa?
It was a typical sort of reporting experience. I was watching television one day. I was watching the Essence Awards, and these guys were getting a big award from Essence Magazine for their work in the community because they had just become doctors. And even as they were just become doctors, they had already agreed that they were going to give back. And so I saw a clip of their story and said, I've got to write about these guys. And so I initially wrote about them as a feature story for the Washington Post. And one thing led to another.
And the book, of course, just resonated, a bestseller. What did you learn about writing and co-authoring through that process?
Well, that was the first book I'd ever written. The guys, since I had written the feature story for the Washington Post, they started getting interest from publishers and they asked me to collaborate with them as the writer. And I just said, you know what, we'll figure it out. And we did. I just learned to listen more than I ever had before because I had to help write this book in their voice. I had to listen to their voice, listen to their stories, and try to share it in the way that they shared it, so that it was their story, not mine. And so I think that was the thing that I learned doing this kind of work, that the story belongs to them. My role is to help pull this story out of them and to do what I can to help share it in the best narrative way possible. But it's their story, their
What's the
voice.
Well, that's important to remember. What is the difference between when you wrote or co-authored their story with the memoir that you did with the youngest person of the Little Rock Nine?
Really, the process was the same because I was helping each of them to tell their story. And it involved listening and really helping to pull her story out of her because her name was Carlotta Walls Lanier. She was the youngest member of the Little Rock Nine. And she had been deeply traumatized by what happened to her in Little Rock. And so it was very painful for her to talk about it, very painful for her to remember. And so the biggest part of my job was just helping to pull this story out of her and to capture her voice in telling this story. But the process was very similar, just using my ear as a reporter to listen to what the story was, to listen to her voice, and to try to capture her voice in the book.
For those who are at the point now where they really want to get off the dime and say, okay, I'm going to get this done, what would you recommend? Because again, it's their story. I think they got that, or they want to share an expertise. I think they got that, but they may not know what to include or how much to include? Because again, someone's body of work could expand decades.
Exactly. And I think that that is the hardest part, really, of getting started with the book. You have to spend a good bit of time thinking about it, thinking about the book, thinking about what you want to say before you actually sit down to write a word. Because part of it is asking yourself, what is my story? What do I want to say? What do I have to offer that's bigger than myself? Okay. So just ask yourself, what is my story? And try to figure out how to say that in a paragraph or two. That helps you to narrow the focus, because most of us have lived, any a considerable number of years, and it's just not possible to put everything we've experienced in a book. And even so, we wouldn't want to just say, I did this, and then the next day I did this. You have to figure out what the theme is, what the important element of the book is, what you're trying to say in the book. And then everything that you include in the book feeds to that theme, that point, that main point. And it has to move. You start somewhere, and where do you end up? You can't just sort of stay in the same place. It'll be a boring book. It's sort of, think of it like a movie. If you were writing a movie, what part of your life would be highlighted? And how would you tell that story? Where would you start? What would be the dramatic element of your life or of the book? And then where will it end up?
Well, that is a good analogy and a good comparison as well. Tell us a little bit about how you have seen the publishing landscape, because everyone thinks, okay, I will give birth to this novel, I'll give birth to this book or the self-help book, and then hand it off, and the publisher, publicist, and everybody else is going to just take it and run, and I'll be just like Lisa Frazier Page. I will be a nationally acclaimed author. But what's the reality today?
I think there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that traditional publishing is shrinking a bit. It's harder to get a book published, especially a memoir. There's less interest from traditional publishers in these kinds of books. The great news is that self-publishing has exploded. I mean, it had really exploded and made it much easier for people to publish their own stories. And the issue is that there's a vast difference sometimes in the quality of self-publishing companies, but the process of telling your story and the process of finding a publisher who is willing to publish your story, there are many, many, many more opportunities, and people are taking advantage of it.
Right. And people are knowing that if I have my niche, or if I already have an audience, even if I have a publisher interested in my project, they're still expecting me to bring that audience and to do pre-sales and to get engaged that interest before they say yes. They want to know
Yes,
that it's not going to be a problem for them.
that is a big, big, big part of it now. They expect, especially if you're trying to do a memoir, if you're trying to do your story, you have to come with a following almost, because if a traditional publisher is going to take a shot on your work, they have to know that you're speaking to someone. That's one of the main differences, I think, than when I first started. The expectations of the publishers, they're much, much higher now in terms of what they're looking for from the person who is presenting his or her story.
Very good. We could talk forever, but I promised that I wouldn't keep you too long. I know because you're working today. What we always like to find out when it comes to advice that really made a difference in your life. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received? Lisa, who gave it to you, and how have you used it, or maybe even continue to use it in your life?
Monica, I've been thinking about that, and I really can't pin it down to like one piece of advice, because I've had some incredible mentors throughout my life. And I think that what they have shown me, even if they didn't tell me these exact words, is always be willing to learn, because my career has changed so much. I started out as a newspaper reporter. I had this opportunity to do a wonderful book. And so I had to figure that out, how to write a book. And then that opened up a whole different career for me. And then I left newspapering and decided to do public relations or communications for a minute, did that for a while. And so my career has evolved. And the one thing that has been consistent, I think, is that I've always been willing to learn and keep learning. And I think that I will, at least I hope to do that for the rest of my days, to always consider myself a perpetual learner, because it just pushes you past your comfort zone. We can all get stuck in a place, but if we're willing to learn and to open ourselves up to new opportunities and new opportunities to learn, I think that we can continue to grow. But I've had great mentors all my life. And I think that that's the thing that they've shown me, just pushed me to go out, try it, learn, keep learning. And I think that that's what I would say to anybody, regardless of what field you're in. And to all the powerhouse women out there, try something new. Be willing to learn. Be willing to surround yourselves with people who can teach you something. You shouldn't always be the smartest one in the room. Find people who are smarter than you, who can teach you something new. And that's what I've tried to do throughout my career.
Well, that is sage advice, and thank you for sharing that. And can people follow you on LinkedIn? What's the best way to do that?
I have been terrible with social media. I'm going to bring my LinkedIn up to par. I am on LinkedIn, but I do need to update it. So I will be doing that soon.
Okay.
But the best way, if people want to contact me, if they have questions, you can email me at llfpage@aol.com. I am the last living person on AOL, I know.
She did say AOL, right? That's good. Hey, if it works for you.
Email, because I've had it since I started, and I do get a lot of communication from people out of the blue. And I just don't want to lose that connection, but that's sort of a running joke that I'm still on AOL.
You still have a black rotary phone, or did you get that up? Okay. Just checking. Well, Lisa, funny. Thank you for sharing your story and for giving some tips and some guidance and some wisdom for others who are at this place now where they want to share their story. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me on. And let me just say, I am so proud of you and in awe of all that you do and all that you offer. You are definitely a powerhouse woman yourself. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being there for me way back when, because we go back to WYLD.
Oh,
and
wow.
You were someone I looked up to way back then.
Well, thank you. And of course, you're a tremendous writer. And I always say, if you can write, you'll always have a job or a career or something that will help you with the learning. So Lisa, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
It has been. The pleasure's been all mine. Thanks, Monica. Have a great day.
You too. Yes, we've been talking to Lisa Frazier Page. So I want to encourage you. It won't happen overnight, but start. Be willing to learn. And if there's that story, that burning story or sharing of your expertise, please make sure you do it. And thank you so much for being with us on another edition of the Powerhouse Woman Show. We'll talk to you live next Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us.